The Boston Massacre. Lobsters! Lobsters for sale! One thing I'm noticing about this author is that they often start the chapter with a dialogue, with someone speaking. So that's just a really interesting craft move. Lobsters! Lobsters for sale! Every time a redcoat walked through the streets of Boston, he heard angry jeers, people making rude comments about him. Sometimes he felt a quick push from behind, and splat, he found himself face down in a pile of garbage. The redcoats began to hate Boston and everyone in it. The townspeople hated them right back. British soldiers infuriated the people of Boston by gambling, drinking, and holding noisy parades on the Sabbath. Finally, on March 5th, 1770, the situation exploded. It was a dark night, cold and snowy. A soldier was standing guard in the sentry box in front of the customs house. A boy came along and began shouting insults at him. The soldier dashed out of his box and hit the boy with his musket. The boy ran away crying. But soon he came back with his friends. They threw snowballs at the guard and screamed, "Lousy rascal! Bloody back!" A crowd began to gather. The meeting house bell tolled. Men ran through the streets calling, "Town born! Turn out!" This cry was usually raised to call townspeople to help fight a fire. In fact, some people thought there was a fire. They rushed out of their houses carrying buckets of water. Others were ready to fight. They grabbed fence railings and rocks and ran toward the customs house. The terrified sentry shouted for help. Captain Thomas Preston hurried to his side with 7 redcoats. They loaded their muskets, lowered their bayonets, and faced the angry crowd. "Go home!" Captain Preston yelled. "The sentry was only doing his duty." But the crowd screamed insults at the soldiers and pressed closer. Someone smashed a club across Preston's arm. Rocks flew. Suddenly, a shot rang out, then another. A man in the crowd dropped down dead. Preston ran among his men, striking up their guns and yelling at them to stop firing. But when the smoke cleared and the crowd withdrew, 3 men lay dead and 2 more were dying. Boston would long remember this terrible night. It's interesting. It's almost a little unbelievable that it all just started with a young boy who was just being a child and making insults. But then it escalated into this big fight between the townspeople and the soldiers. And then it ended with 3 men dead and 2 more dying. Let's read some of the illustrations. Crispus Attucks was a tall, strong dockhand. He was part black and part Indian. He and his friends called the redcoats names and threatened them with clubs. Attucks was shot in the chest and killed by Hugh Montgomery, a British private. Two of the redcoats who had fired on the crowd, Matthew Kilroy and Hugh Montgomery, were found guilty of manslaughter. They were branded on the thumb and dismissed from the British Army. So they actually got in trouble for what they did. They were found guilty of manslaughter. So they went to like a trial, and then it was determined that their actions were not okay, not appropriate. The redcoats and their officers were bombarded with snowballs stuffed with ice or bits of broken oyster shells. Each year after the Boston Massacre, the people of Boston marked its anniversary with prayers for the dead and angry speeches against the British. A large meeting was planned for the 5th anniversary, so 5 years after the date. The British officers decided that they would not tolerate strong speeches against their country. They made a plan. A young British officer was to bring an egg to the meeting. If the speeches were unacceptable, he would throw the egg at a woman in the audience. That would be the signal for the other British officers to arrest the colonists' leaders. Unfortunately for the British, the young officer fell on the way to the meeting and broke the egg. No one was arrested. That's interesting. I wonder if that's true. I mean, it's in the book, but I always want to be a critical reader and wonder about the things that I'm reading and then verify them by reading them in another source. All right, so do we think that the Boston Massacre was really a massacre? Is it really as bad as we have made it sound? The word massacre is a really strong word, so keep thinking about that.